Hello, welcome to my channel, Oathbound Secrets, and I've got more books for you. I don't know where to begin. I'm just gonna, this is just a random pile of books to be honest, but it's all about traditional witchcraft folklore, okay? That folkloric magic. The first one that I will begin with is a book called Discovery of the Impostures of Witches by John Brindley. This is a great reference book because it was published in 1680. So we're talking about beliefs that were contemporary to the witch hunts, the witch trials that were occurring in England and all across Europe. They were more commonly vicious in the Protestant areas because we're talking about a era in which there was a lot of difficulties between Catholics and Protestants, and there's kind of like religious fervor, and also the early kind of days of nationalism and changes in the way that the government was structured, changes in the economic system, the very early days of capitalism. All of these things meant that people were more anxious than usual, and that's kind of why there were witch hunts. I'll read you a little example of what's being said in this book. A discourse concerning astrology. Ooh. That astrology, which in our days, by its being mixed with so many superstitious fopperies, is become suspicious and almost ridiculous, was at the first a thing of greatest consideration, may be concluded from the acceptance it found with the most famous men in the very infancy of the world. Who was the first author of it is uncertain, yet it's credible that it began at Adam and was continued by his son Seth, and communicated to posterity in reference to which opinion, in the story of Seth's pillars, which pillars were made by reason of what they had heard from Adam, that the world would be twice destroyed, once by water and afterwards by fire. So you can see, like, they're very much working with a biblical framework. We're talking about the Puritan Christians of the time, which were all about refocusing religion on the Bible, whereas they saw Catholicism as like a perversion of Christianity. It was just full of paganism and superstition, and so they wanted to base everything on the biblical texts, and that is kind of what resulted in the witch hunts. So basically he's talking about how astrology essentially isn't bad in itself. Okay. Yeah, it's a super interesting book. It is obviously all written in like quite like old fashioned English, so it can be a little bit difficult to understand, but this is really useful if you want to actually understand like the cultural context of the witch hunts. Following that book, we have a scholarly study of witches, and this is by Tracy Borman, who did study PhD in the University of Hull, and that was history. Oh no, she studied and taught history at the University of Hull, and is now Chief Executive of the Heritage Education Trust and Interim Chief Curator of Historic Royal Palaces. Okay, so proper historian. So here you get like the official opinion on the witch hunts, why exactly they happened, and what exactly people believed about witches. So if you're interested in like very scholarly information studying the witchcraft trials, then this is the book for you. Again, I'm going to read a little bit from this book so you just get like an example of what it's like. Okay, so even after conviction, a felon had several possible avenues of escape, and we're talking about people convicted of witchcraft. In fact, relatively few felons convicted at this court suffered the death penalty. Judges had a number of ways of mitigating punishment at their discretion. Transportation to places overseas was one such option, as was claiming benefit of clergy, a legal loophole that spared a convict from hanging if they were able to read a certain passage from the Bible, formerly the preserve of churchmen. The privilege was extended to laymen during the reign of Henry VIII, but it did not extend to those found guilty of witchcraft. The potential for a convicted witch to escape death horrified those who sought their destruction. The authors of the treatises against witchcraft urged those dispensing justice not to flinch from delivering the ultimate punishment. Therefore, though they should repent, yet die they must, to justify God and prevent further ensnaring, that, though their body perish, yet the soul may be saved. When you read all these historical analyses of the witchcraft trials, you really understand why it is that people started calling themselves witches in the 20th century. Why was it that people looked back on all this information and thought, yeah, the witches, actually, they were wrong. They were wronged, and we want to reclaim the title of witch and turn it into something positive, something different, something that is still powerful and not necessarily good or bad, something kind of more neutral, maybe. Different people have different ideas about this. Another book that I think really helps you understand the kind of magic performed by modern witches is this Grimoires, History of Magic Books by Owen Davies. My goodness, another very scholarly book, but it really helps you understand the type of magic that contemporary witches are performing and where those rituals come from. Because things like casting a circle, who came up with that? Whose idea was that? It's from the Grimoires. And who was reading the Grimoires? Where did the Grimoires come from? How did they reach us? This will explain everything, and it's incredibly fascinating. You have to understand that for a long time, the vast majority of people were completely illiterate. And it was only when the printing press was invented in, I think it was oh my gosh, was it the 16th century or the 17th century? It must have been the late 16th century. Sorry, I can't remember. 1547, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, the printing press was invented, and suddenly it meant that books were a lot more available because they could just be pumped out through these presses instead of being handwritten manuscripts, which is what the monasteries had. The monks and the nuns were people that were trained to handwrite books and make copies of books for distribution amongst the through the monasteries. And anyway, so the printing press happened, and then all of a sudden, boom, books are available. At the same time, the Protestant Reformation meant that there was a huge emphasis on teaching people how to read and write because they wanted people to be reading the Bible. Unfortunately, that's not all people were interested in reading. They were also very interested in reading the Grimoires. Danger. Let me read you a little bit from this book. Concerns about the dangerous spread of grimoires were expressed by intellectuals from across Protestant and Catholic Europe. King James I and VI of England and Scotland warned the readers of his demonology against the evils of the fourth book of occult philosophy. The French judge, Jean Baudin, denounced Agrippa's work, real and false, as the detestable poison of witchcraft. Writing in 1595, another French witch hunter, Nicolas Remy, stated that Agrippa, Pierre d'Abano, and Picatrix, three masters in damnable magic, have left more prescriptions than is necessary for the good of men. Dangerous information. Amongst his warnings to pastors about superstitious practices, the German Protestant theologian Joshua Amdius, who lived between 1626 and 1686, included the use of blasphemous books of magic ascribed to Solomon. The Jesuit theologian Martin del Rio believed the spread of grimoires generated two types of implicit diabolic pacts. The first occurred when someone knowingly and willingly uses those superstitious signs usually employed by magicians, which he gets either from books or from conversations with magicians. The second, when people who in good faith read superstitious books, thinking they are by reputable philosophers and physicians. Ooh, the dangers of grimoires. Fucking amazing book. You gotta read it. Here is a nice book that is basically based on the witchcraft trials of Isobel Gowdie, or Gowdie, how do you say her name? It's an idea of like what her grimoire would have looked like if she had a grimoire. What would its contents be? And this is a book by Ash William Mills called The Black Book of Isobel Gowdie and Other Scottish Spells and Charms. Lovely little book, and it's full of sort of poems, spells, rituals, very interesting stuff. So just sort of like examples of what he thinks the kind of spells that Isobel Gowdie would have been performing and other magical practitioners would have been performing at the time. Lovely. For example, this is a little spell that somebody would have done to cure the evil eye or overlooking, and they would sprinkle some water. There was a little bit of ritual beforehand, and then they would sprinkle some water on the person who's afflicted and say these words: shake from thee thy harm, shake from thee thy jealousy, shake from thee thy illness, in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit. Yes, you will find that a lot of spells and magic from that time period were heavily based on the Christian framework. Next book that I've got to talk about is another fantastic scholarly kind of book. It's called Cunning-Folk and Familiar Spirits by Emma Wilby. Wow, what an amazing book, because what this book does is it really explains the kind of animistic type beliefs that people had in fairies, spirits, elves, familiar spirits, and the kind of experiences people had, the kind of folklore that was believed in at the time. And this book is also has the subtitle Shamanistic Visionary Traditions in Early Modern British Witchcraft and Magic. Shamanistic, what a word. Because what the argument is that the kind of beliefs and practices in folk magic had some elements similar to shamanism. So interesting. Yes, very interesting. What kind of trances and visions and experiences were people having where they were seeing otherworldly creatures? Let me read you just a little bit. Continental scholars researching the folkloric roots of the European witches' Sabbath generally maintain that associated beliefs surrounding encounters with solitary spirits, usually described as the devil, were also sourced in shamanistic trance experiences. Gabor Klanikse, not sure how to pronounce that name, I'm sorry, claims that the initiatory vision of the Central European cunning man, which occurs when he first falls into trance, is characteristic of shamanism. Wolfgang Behringer, that the angel encountering adventures of the Bavarian cunning man Konrad Stocklin were an expression of his shamanistic abilities and evopox that contacting the supernatural through trance techniques in order to accomplish community tasks was common among mediators connected with the system of witchcraft. This activity was aided and abetted by a helping spirit and corresponds to the criteria that are generally accepted for shamanism. Yes. Great book. Very interesting. Highly fucking recommend. The next book is along a similar line of thought. It's called Popular Magic, Cunning-Folk in English History by Owen Davies. He's back again. Yeah, he's written some really good books. People often draw a distinction between cunning-folk or professional magical practitioners and witches, because witchcraft was a crime that you could be convicted of and sentenced to death, whereas practicing magic, not necessarily. Okay, so if you were practicing magic professionally, helping people with cures and charms and doing useful things for the community, then you would be called cunning or wise, or various other different titles depending on what region we're in. And that's what this book is all about. So it's veering a little bit away from the witchcraft stuff and more into just the magical practices of professionals, because it was a profession that people could make a living as, or it could also be a kind of like side hustle next to your usual job, like if you're a farm labourer or had a brewery brewing mead or brewing beer, whatever your job was, whatever your day job was, you could be working magic on the side. And I'll just read a little bit. People consulted Cunning-Folk because they provided explanations and solutions for the many misfortunes that occurred in their daily lives, as well as holding out the prospect of a better future through the attainment of love and money. People came to them with requests ranging from the obscure and petty. One man asked Billy Brewer to reverse magically the yellowing of his best clothes, to matters of life and death, when Cunning-Folk were called in to cure the terminally ill or assassinate suspected witches. No job was too small, and few jobs were too big, short of resurrecting the dead. To the romantically inclined, they held out the promise of ideal husbands, to the greedy small fortunes, to the sick a last resort, to the farmer salvation from financial ruin, to the sailor protection from the elements, to the thief agonizing pain, and to his victim the recovery of property. So despite the fact that there were these witch hunts, the practice of cunning-folk, wise women, and magical practitioners of various sorts did continue. It continued well up to sort of like the Industrial Revolution, and things started to change as society changed, people's views started to change, and it slowly became less fashionable to turn to that type of magical practitioner. I think more or less in the Victorian era, there was a little bit of a distinction, usually based on class, that if you were lower class, working class, then you're more likely to turn to cunning folk, wise women, etc. But if you're a little bit more high class, then you'd be more interested in maybe something a bit more exotic, maybe something a little bit more and the movement of spiritualism, that was huge in like the Victorian era. And there was just like a shift in the type of magic that was kind of fashionable and more openly accepted, whereas cunning folk became something more old-fashioned, superstitious, and just kind of lost its popularity over the years. But obviously, there were still people that were clinging on to that knowledge, that information, and people still passing on the practices in the background. To which, we gain a lot of information still through folklorists who are studying the beliefs and practices that people clung on to. The next book, Carlo Ginzburg, Ecstasies. Ooh. Deciphering the Witch's Sabbath, translated by Raymond Rosenthal. This is a lovely book because what this does is it's similar to the one by Emma Wilby, and that it looks at this shamanistic aspect of witchcraft practices and the idea of the Sabbath as being something that is experienced in a trance-like state. So, hell of a book, hell of a lot of information, and the theories about people's beliefs and experiences being very shamanistic makes a lot of sense. Even if the souls of the dead do not eat, he had explained, they still drink good wine and warm themselves at the hearth whenever they find a house with a great deal of wood, but the wine does not diminish or grow less because it is the dead who drink it. Now, the thing about Carlo Ginzburg is that he talks a lot about practices in Europe, across Europe, Italy, northern Italy, Central Europe, all these different areas. There are other books that focus more on England, Britain, called Cecil Williamsons' Book of Witchcraft, a grimoire of the Museum of Witchcraft by Steve Patterson. Okay, so basically, context. Cecil Williamson was a folklorist, somebody who was gathering up information about folk magic practices and any evidence he could find, and basically curated a museum of witchcraft and magic, which today can be visited in Cornwall. There's also quite a lot of juicy information about Cecil Williamson and Gerald Gardner, because he was working with Gerald Gardner for a while. And you get to hear a different perspective on who Gerald was and what people were doing at the time, in like the 1960s in England. So I'll read a little bit for you. Cecil was a driven man. 5 times in his life, he was forced to close down his business and leave town. He could have chosen a quiet life with his museums of smuggling and shells, but still he persevered with his desire to make a public display of the covert world of witchcraft. In the face of this, the claims that he was a businessman cynically exploiting a market makes no sense. So how did he see himself? In an article published in 1952, which appears to be one of his earliest appearances in print, he is introduced as a witchcraft consultant. It's his full-time occupation. He presents himself as one who practices magic, but with an attitude of scientific objectivity. This identity of a detached practitioner is a thread that continues throughout his media appearances. In a 1974 interview, in which he curiously decries all witches as murderers, when asked if he himself is a witch, he replies, "I am not a witch in your sense of the word. You can call me an occultist, a demonologist if you wish. I don't belong to any group or society." If one takes the classical derivation of the word demon from daemon, meaning spirit, this is probably an apt description, for he devoted his life to being an intermediary between this world and the world of spirit. Next, we're going to refer to another museum. Okay, if you haven't been to the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cornwall, get down there now. But there's another museum called the Ashmoleon, which is in Oxford, isn't it? I'm pretty sure that's Oxford. And this is called Spellbound, Magic, Ritual and Witchcraft. Basically, this is a very lovely book full of photos of all the museum artifacts and explaining exactly what they are, what they were believed to be used for. And it's a very useful book, documenting, things like this. Have you ever seen this, the mummified cats? If you are familiar with British folklore, then you know all about the mummified cats. Witches were one of the greatest threats to the home and those who lived there. We know from the archives that some concealed objects were the result of anti-witchcraft rituals conducted by people known as Cunning-Folk or wise women and wise men. For centuries, these individuals offered magical services to their local communities for myriad purposes. They detected stolen property, revealed the identity of thieves, healed with herbs, consulted the stars, told fortunes, and dealt with affairs of the heart. Above all, Cunning-Folk were the formidable foe of witches and their spells. With the knowledge and power they had gained through grimoires, magic books, or through relations with the fairies, Cunning-Folk conducted rituals and created charms for their clients' needs. Okay, last book, final book to recommend, and this really pins down the overall message is that witches were considered dangerous, evil creatures of the night, and that this was strongly contrasted with people who were performing magical rituals for protection and self-defense, defending people from the witches. So this book is called Instruments of Darkness, Witchcraft in England, 1550 to 1750, by James Sharpe. So here you really get to understand what it was that was so evil about witches. That human beings might be possessed by devils was not, of course, a new idea in the 16th century. While there was no necessary connection between supposedly demonic possession and witchcraft, indeed, something very like possession could occur within the wider phenomena of ecstatic religious experience and other spiritual crises. But in Elizabethan and Stuart England, cases involving allegations of witchcraft following possession became more common, or at least became well publicised. There is ample evidence, notably in the casebooks of doctors, that people believed that they or others they knew could be possessed or afflicted by the devil, by demons, or by other forms of evil spirit without the assistance or encouragement of human intermediaries. But many were ready to make the connection between suffering as a result of supernatural causes and the presence of a malevolent witch. This connection was to provide a major strand in English witchcraft beliefs. So, if you read some of these books, then I think you will thoroughly understand exactly what a witch is, and you'll start to understand why people call themselves witches today. Why? Why would you call yourself something that was believed to be evil? Why would you want to be an evil woman? It really is a kind of rebellion, isn't it? And it's a kind of reaction against the accusations. Because if you're being accused by these sort of religious zealots of being an evil woman and causing people to fall sick and die just by looking at them, then I think there comes a point where you say, do you know what? Actually, the evil is in the church, and the evil is in these people that accuse other people of being witches, and the evil is in those people who drag people out of their homes, torture them, and murder them. Yeah, actually, we think those are the evil people, and that witches were innocent. And in reclaiming the word witch for yourself, you're kind of saying, actually, like, I as a person am free from your judgment and your beliefs concerning witches, and I'm going to celebrate all these ideas about women being independent and being able to be free from the religious doctrine and the oppression of the patriarchal church. And that's really how, like, the witchcraft movement got started. That it was very much based in, like, a feminist kind of principle, that the witchcraft accusations were directed towards women more than anybody else, depending on, like, where exactly in the world we're talking about and what years. But, overall, generally speaking, it was more pointed towards women based on the patriarchal beliefs of the time, that women would be more vulnerable to being misled by the devil, basically, and being evil. And when you have all of this pressure from patriarchy that you have to perform certain tasks and you have to behave in a certain way and you have to dress in a certain way, etc., 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 relishing in being an evil woman is a rebellion. And it's a way of saying, actually, fuck you and your morality, which, your morals don't even make sense. You claim to be the good guys and you're out hurting children. You're being the abusers. You're beating your wives and you're murdering people and you're doing all these horrible things. And then you're trying to tell me that you're a Christian. Trying to tell me that you're a Christian and that you're the good guy. No, I don't think so, actually. And that's why I call myself a witch. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. If you have any other books that you would personally like to recommend, then do so in the comment section below. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.